producing something that has something in common. And maybe that's true, but it's very, very hard in the very short term to come up with exactly what's happening there. So please forgive me if I get it wrong, because I'm sure I will. But what I'd really like to talk about that I do think affects in very different ways the stories that we heard, the really wonderful, deep analyses of disaster, really, ecological disaster, which is kind of taken for granted in most of the stories we just heard. But I want to talk about complexity, okay? There are 4 very complex situations in all the places that you described, even if those are fictional worlds, okay? And I think that one of the big differences, of course, with a fictional account is that the author of that account is the one that's in charge of creating a narrative that's dependent on their ability to demonstrate complexity. They decide what happens and what you think or what we think as readers is going to happen. And so the analyst is in this kind of weird situation of having to not only judge how they do something and depict something in a very interesting and insightful way, but whether or not you want to accept the singular, often singular narratives that they produce about what's going to happen to everybody. So, whereas if you're thinking about a living account, an account of a differentiated community, differentiated in some way or another, as a researcher, you're surrounded by a swirling mass of decisions and decision makers, of people who are just trying to decide what to do, whether it's to survive or it's to move forward or to move away. And so you have this constant complexity that's unfolding right in front of you with the people that you're living with or visiting or interviewing in depth. So, okay, so that's kind of that's the backdrop to what I'm thinking about here as we move forward. Another thing I think was in common but not always stated outright in this way is that everyone, I mean, it's a thing now, isn't it, to not want to see people who are victims as only victims. Of course, we don't want to think that. But again, that I think in the fictional accounts, it's necessary to most of the narratives to have the people be victims in order to generate interest. And yeah, I mean, I haven't read the novels that you were dealing with, but it's just something to think about that I think requires the analyst to think about what are the ironings over, the homogenizations that are present in this narrative. How is it that I can recognize complexity? How can I move beyond the received wisdom of this author and what is influencing her or them, and what is often the macro story of what is going on in that tale. So whether we're analyzing fiction or living experiences, panelists are in an excellent position to actually challenge or test that received wisdom, to take a more suspicious perspective on what is being put out there and saying, would it always be women who are the bigger victims, or that climate change affects women or girls more? Well, yes, we all accept that generally. I think we kind of accept that. But what makes that true in different places is different in different places. And what we learn about, if we're thinking also about alternatives to what's been going on, we need to know more about the how and the why and the under what conditions this becomes true. So I guess, that's a tall order for new researchers in particular. You're thinking, who am I to say this is a lot more complex than you're talking about here? But at the same time, that is exactly what you bring to the process. That is exactly where your contribution is going to be, because you're going to go, wait a minute, you know, this isn't really how Peluso described it. There's something different that's going on here that's not put into it, right? And by explaining a new concept, a new context, thinking relationally about people of the different genders or different economic classes, or actually trying to think intersectionally, which personally I find really hard to do in some kind of abstract way, because it's so complex. Okay, so how do we move out of this, well, yeah, it's too complex to, it's just all about difference or something like that. I think the way to do it, actually, what's worked for me, is moving into a mode of research that really foregrounds people's lives and their own experiences. And one way of doing this is through collecting life histories, genealogies of families, of individuals, of laborers, of plantation workers, of the people who are migrating from one place to another, and to think about exactly how, within the context of a family, maybe a multi-sided family, or a stretched family, someone that's in a city, goes to a city to find work, but the family is still, bulk of the family may still be back in a village, or there may be 5 or 6 children that go to different places, and so they're stretched across many different directions. But basically, it's through those life histories and the complexities that arise in their own experiences around that, or the way an author is depicting it, is that you can start to see how these differences came to be. Okay, we're talking histories, life histories at a kind of micro level, and it's not just kinship like it used to be. It's about work. It's about migration patterns. It's about relations to land and resources at different points in someone's life, whether that's a temporal distinction, or it's a distinction of how many children did you have at this particular point in time? What was going on when the 3rd child was born? What happened when that child was 12 years old? What's going on when the volcano erupted, or whatever it is that you're looking at? The life history provides you a frame through which you can get out all this empirical difference and then stand confused before it for a long while and let it mature and marinate, as we say, so that, you know, through a slow process of thinking about this, I think ideas about what people have in common and what is different start to emerge. So it's kind of subjecting us to the same things that conceptually we think about of emergent knowledge, or the production of knowledge through a set of relationships, you know? So anyway, I think the key in these cases is not, and I'm not saying people are doing this, I'm just saying that there's a tendency sometimes for people to stop the research when they've heard what they expected to hear, instead of searching out the counterfactual, the thing that doesn't make sense, the person that's described as the weird person in a village because of this experience or that experience. But those are the things that you want to pursue. Find the things that don't fit. Find out what is different about that particular person or circumstance. So I think in those kinds of cases, you can look for instances to test your own acceptance of particular kinds of tropes or landscapes or whatever. Let me just give you one quick example about how I think sometimes we all homogenize in ways that aren't really helpful to understanding what's going on. Take a word like migration, okay? I'm an agrarian studies person, and for agrarian studies, there used to be pretty much one explanation about migration, and it's always bad. Migration is always bad. And yes, people don't want to leave their homes, but there's all kinds of different things going on within that one little word, migration. Okay, you've got short-term and long-term migration. You've got circular and permanent migration. You've got government-sponsored and resettlement kinds of migration. You've got spontaneous migration. You have migration in government-sponsored migration in Indonesia, where people are given land and told to move. Now, whether or not that worked or not, that depends on the place, that depends on the people, that depends on what the risks and uncertainties are, and on things that couldn't always be predicted. But you've also got migration into a place for work and out of a place for work. So something like migration, labor migration, you have forced labor. Okay, that's a different kind of migration than an opportunistic kind of labor, when there's a structure for people to go and find ways to find jobs, and recognize in advance that there will be hardships, that they may have a terrible boss, that there could be very bad things that happen, but that there's also possibilities for something else to happen. So again, for me that's an easy kind of thing, because I just come out of a research project thinking about this. But anyway, I'm not really in the business of giving lots of advice to you guys, because you really know the places that you're working on. I thought the things that you put out there were beautifully described, and some of them extremely elegant. But I was left wanting to hear just a little bit more about complexity, and so I look very much forward to your next drafts of these papers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your discussion and comments related to the four presenters. Now it's time for discussion. Welcome all of you to raise your voice about this issue, very important issue. Let's please. And you are the second. Please let them.